Hey, welcome again to the Be a Maker Club podcast. I'm your host, Zeph. Today we have another maker with us. His name is Yash Gupta. Yash has worked with me previously. He's a friend who hosts incredible parties. And he's a maker and tinkerer, and he likes to take photographs. Hey, Yash, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Um, I wanted to ask you more about who you are as a person and what are the first couple of things that bring you joy.
I am somebody who's a very social, fun guy. I like to meet people. I like to have parties, like you mentioned, and those parties revolve around food a lot and celebrations that I grew up with in India.
Hey, so Yash, tell us about what kinds of things you make.
So there are two categories that I would basically lump the things that I make into. One would be personalized functional things, and the other would be sentimental or artistic or decorative things.
Okay, and tell us about the functional things. Like, what do you mean? Like, if something breaks in your house, you just repair it?
Well, it's not necessarily when something just breaks. I have made a career in user experience design. I've been working in this field for 10 years. And even before that, growing up, I was somehow very attuned to the intricacies of things, the quality of things, and the way nicer objects are going to improve your quality of life. So even today, in my day to day, whenever I encounter something that's a slight inconvenience for me or that I recognize could be a better user experience, I end up turning to how I can craft things myself to improve that user experience.
What is a recent example of something that you've made functionally? You know?
One of the larger projects that I went on around the house was for our kitchen. The lower cabinets, I really did not like how we had to scoot down to eye level to reach really deep into the back of our lower cabinets to pull out any of the utensils or appliances that we had there. So, what people are doing these days from the beginning in their kitchens are installing drawers, pull out drawers in the bottom cabinets, and I wanted to do that. So that's something I decided to DIY and make myself.
So, like, you did all the woodwork, like cut out all the panels. Like, essentially, you were doing what you would hire a carpenter to do, right?
Yes, hire a carpenter or a cabinetry expert. I had a whole plan drawn out after measuring the available cavity space for each of my cabinets. I used a software to try and give me a guide on how to cut out the different panels I needed out of a 8x4 sheet so that there's minimal wastage. So I was keeping track of all of those pieces that I cut out. I was using circular saw, I was using a table saw, I was even using my what is that one called? Um, they call it a chop saw or miter saw. I was using that, and I started learning more and more about woodworking during that project. It wasn't like I was an expert in woodworking. That's why this was something I decided to do. It was the need to improve our lives and our experience in the kitchen. Again, because I cook so much, that made me want to do this whole project. If there was a different technique or way to accomplish this, I would have happily jumped into that as well if it was something I realized I needed to learn welding for or fabricating anything out of plastics or acrylic. It's all about the end goal.
Right. Which actually is interesting because I wanted to go back a little bit towards what you talked about, user experience. So clearly, in this example, you love cooking, but because there was a user experience, and I'm doing air quotes around user experience, that wasn't optimum in your kitchen, you then set about learning another new skill, learning about another new way of making things in order to solve that problem, right? It's like you're doing so you kind of did like the in real life a version of what you would do for a digital product online. Like if a button doesn't work, or isn't that correct? That'd be correct.
Absolutely. I find it in my life personally, digital and physical things are almost one and the same. They meld so completely with each other because I also have around the house smart switches and sensors. So after installing these physical components, I am mostly interacting with them through software and code because a sensor picks up somebody moving, a sensor detects that there isn't enough light in that same room, and then the other actuator automatically will turn on the light.
Oh wow, that is pretty cool. So onto a slightly maybe reflective piece that I want you to comment on. When I try to do such things, there's always moments, usually like halfway into the project, where I go, "Oh, I give up. I'm gonna call somebody, or I should have bought the thing." And then towards maybe the last quarter of the project, I will cut a little bit of corners because I'm just frustrated or I don't really know how to do it. And then when I finish, it all seems to work most of the time.
This is a topic that I personally deal with a lot too. It has got perfectionism issues, it has got these setbacks or even failures, and then the sort of rejection sensitive dysphoria, or just being so hard on yourself and not having the self confidence that you actually know what you're doing, or imposter syndrome, as you may
Yeah,
call it.
yeah.
So there are definitely times where, despite knowing measure twice, cut once, I've found that something I've cut doesn't work, or in the end, the result isn't, to my eyes, as pretty as it should be, but it works functionally. So it helps a little bit that I'm not so focused on aesthetics all the time with these functional things. Uh, that way, I can get away with something not being painted or an extra screw or a hole just kind of being left behind somewhere where it's visible. Now, on the failure side, for certain projects, it does get to a point where restarting it or fixing it can be such a big effort. And with ADHD, I'm likely to then get distracted by something else and leave that project in that unfinished state for a long time, which I know is not ideal. But what I've learned through 3D printing is that prototyping and redesigning a part over and over again is actually kind of exciting. That's where the stuff that I do professionally in UX design, where we've designed something, we give it for user testing, we prototype something and make changes on the fly as feedback keeps coming in. That is, for me, more fun and easy to do with 3D printing. So there was a project, for example, where in our kitchen, the faucets switch to change between the shower and the sort of stream modes broke.
Oh,
So I was designing that myself in a 3D software and testing, trying to fit it. It doesn't work. Go to version 2, go to version 3, etc.
yeah.
And in that process, the failures didn't seem as final. They didn't seem as detrimental to the end goal. And they were just another step. So I just try to keep telling myself, even on larger projects, when the failures might be a little bit more time consuming and a little bit more, I guess, embarrassing in some ways, that I'll just learn from it and grow.
So I think maybe this is my reflection, right, or at least how I try to assure myself that I'm okay about this. I think it's sometimes when there is a aesthetic involved or almost like a craft part involved, like woodworking. I know cabinetry is very technical, but also there's a craft element. So I always feel that my frustration generally is a little bit higher when there's a craft element. Like with with your example, the switch, it's like, okay, it's a switch. I mean, I can try to make it nice, but I'm mostly making it nice anyway. So So anyway, I just feel like when it's technical, I'm able to keep my emotions aside. Or if it's already a pretty utilitarian or ugly piece of thing anyway, I don't care so much. But this lets me ask you a little bit more about sort of your art side and that part of what you do. Do you one tell us what do you make, and then what's your process like there? And I guess the third question is pretty much the same. How do you feel when somebody starts looking at the art pieces that you've created?
Absolutely. So I love making personal gifts and receiving personalized gifts. I'm not the greatest gift receiver in that I don't want people to have spent a lot of money on gifts for me, and if it's something that is functional, something I need, I would have bought it by myself anyways. If I'm receiving a gift, that's something that I wouldn't have made for myself, that somebody put time and effort into making for them, by themselves, and added a personal sentiment to it. That means a lot for me, and that's what I also love doing for other people in my life. So I design and craft gifts for myself. This thing hanging behind me is an anniversary present that my husband made by himself with his hands. um, I've made gifts that I designed and 3D printed for my friends. I've made gifts that I've built by woodworking and given to my friends. So in that sense, the craft, the artistry, the thought process, and the creativity that's gone inside it means a lot. And I've also, for mode of creative outlet, started designing abstract sculptures, which is something that I first started to get into when I was at Sheridan College. And we took a almost every semester there was a more and more advanced level 3D class, and I got to design some cool abstract 3D sculptures for which I had to do a lot of research. And I kept coming across some really great sculptors and their work. So that abstract sculpture work kind of inspires me still. You might actually know one of the artists, Anish Kapoor. He's from Mumbai, lives in London. I
Maybe being
know
in
you've been in both places too.
uh, that so actually, I'm always interested in learning more about how a maker's personal life has affected the art side. I mean, the functional side, like I said, there's a craft to it, but it's more technical. So I know that you've lived in three countries at least. Is that correct? India, Canada, and the US. So
Yes, that is
are there
correct.
parts of life there, culture there that you feel have encouraged you to make, and then what influences have that been in your artwork at least?
That's a really, really good topic to dive into. I think in India, I was always inclined towards the arts, but that's something that my family and my life I felt wasn't necessarily appreciated by everybody around me. Very early on, I decided I wanted to go into animation. And I have an uncle who would jokingly disparage me by saying, "Oh, so you want to be a painter?" Um, and I think I, from a young age, loved playing with modeling clay and building sculptures along with painting and stuff. Um, but I lately do a little bit less with paint and 2D artwork, but a lot more in terms of 3D. The other things that I grew up with in India um, taught me is to be less wasteful. And that means that anything that you think you can continue using, maybe not for its like first intended purpose, but for a different thing, essentially reusing something, or upcycling, if you will. That's something that I continue doing, whether it's for like a functional reason or an aesthetic reason. And then the last thing that I would say I learned sort of on my own outside of India is, um, to DIY, to kind of get my own hands dirty. Because in India, carpentry wasn't something that I would expect anybody in my like upper middle class family to do. That would be always be something that would get hired out. Um, Same thing for landscaping, gardening, sort of the outside the home or manual labor type chores and tasks. So that um, you know pride in sort of doing whatever it is with your own hands started to sort of grow in me after I moved to North America. After I started seeing like, yeah, everybody shovels their own snow in their driveway, or everybody does their own cleaning around the house or whatever. Every little thing has meaning and purpose. So that's something that I think drives me to make stuff for myself, whether it's for functional reasons or for creative reasons.
Gotcha. Was there any specific, I'd say, Canadian influence? Because I'm just curious. Was there anything from Canada in terms of culture or flavor, artwork maybe, or icons that you feel have stayed with you?
I think Canadian culture was the first time, or my life in Canada was full of diversity. That was the first time I went and had friends from several different countries, and the life there was a complete like eye-opening experience to food and artwork from around the world. And it kind of showed me that just because you're in a specific country, you don't have to be making art that kind of originated from that country, or that only the people from that to bring my experience and style from India and say I don't have to abandon them just because I don't live there anymore. I can express those even here in this multicultural society, and that's something I've continued to keep with me. Just because I'm now a U.S. citizen doesn't mean that I don't still get to enjoy other cultures, my own culture, etc.
Right. Well, I mean, as you know, I've also had a very similar experience, except in a very different country. And I think it's really important. And I found myself that so I went from India to the UK and then now to the US. And like Yash, the UK experience for me was instrumental in sort of getting exposed to a culture that was not my own. But what does making do for you personally? Like, how do you feel when you make things?
So I think for me, the answer to this would be to leave a mark, to leave my mark on this world. This is something uh, that's connected to another topic I was reflecting on with a friend, which is, why we capture moments, why we take photographs or why we take videos. And that also is a style of creativity, which, as you mentioned earlier on, and for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm really into photography. I'm into documenting my life with photographs. I'm into being creative and just expressing with my photographs. And I think making is a similar concept. I design stuff and I share those out with the maker community. I have my accounts on like Thingiverse, Printables, even Maker World now from the Bamboo Lab company. And that's where I will share out 3D designs of stuff that I've made for my own home. And making is a way for me to kind of make a mark in this world. It's not just something that I need to do if I'm getting paid, although I've been getting a lot of encouragement to start my own Etsy store. But outside of the things I make at work as a UX designer, for those companies, for those apps, I also think that whatever I make will continue enhancing and leaving a mark for my friends, for my family, and for other people I don't even know on the internet, or hopefully even future generations.
Yeah. I completely identify with that feeling. It's yeah, like a lot of artists, we want to leave something of ourselves behind. Am I sensing that this is also a form of expression for you? Because in your experience about Canada, you said that people can create things which are not for their culture, not outside the culture. So, are there any unique forms of expression that making allows you to do that you perhaps don't find in other creative pursuits, like photography?
So the thing that's been happening these days in the world of tech is you can very easily have an artificial intelligence or an algorithm recreate in 2 dimensions,
Hmm.
something that has been taught what humans would do in that medium or in that style, and it can recreate it. But I think for anything physical, for anything that's 3 dimensional, if we are constraining the idea of making to the 3D, then that's something that I think makes it a little bit different. Is that when it's something you can hold in your hand, when it's something you can feel physically, you know that it is real. And whether it's fabricated in the physical world by machines or it's fabricated because some other human like touched on it, it's got a property to it that something that's entirely virtual doesn't.
Yeah. No, and I've said this many times to other people, and in a couple of other podcasts too, that I think as a species, we actually evolve because we learn to make. And as long as we live in this physical form, so just kind of building on your tech example, I think our appreciation of the physical world is going to be very deeply tied into who we are as human beings. And in this sort of, I think what tech, all this information world is allowing us to do is to become more expressive about who we are. And I feel that more and more people are going to start making real world objects. I think that's like, I think that's never going to go away, you know. So yeah, thank you very much, Yash. I really appreciate you defining that for us and our listeners. Well, folks, I'm going to say a big thank you to Yash for his time, for being on the podcast. And we're going to try to feature some of his work in the podcast. Also, if he ever launches an Etsy shop, we're going to drop it here so you guys can come and take a look. Yash, thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great talk.
And if you love making as much as we do, please consider signing up at beamakerclub.com become instructor, where you can help others make.